Hi and welcome to the Active Code podcast, brought to you by Aspire Active Partnerships. I'm Paul Griffiths, and joining me each week on the pod is Luke Johnson.
Aspire Active Partnerships is a community of like-minded business leaders who all believe that collaboration in the sports coaching and children's activity sector is essential for success. We've proven that working in collaboration does benefit business growth and essentially helps more children be more active more often.
To combat physical inactivity, we need organisations that are performing at their very best. Organisations will only operate to high standards if they are led well. So, if we can focus on developing high quality leaders throughout an organisation, not just at the top, customers will experience higher quality services, which means heightened enjoyment levels and increased levels of physical activity. And if we do this at an early age, we know that we can build the foundations for a more active, happier and healthier life. The Active Code investigates what it really takes to be a successful leader and how organisations can combat physical inactivity.
We won't be alone through this journey. We are joined by business owners and experts from our sector, as well as inspirational people from outside our industry. We'll understand the importance of physical activity to our guests, reflect on leadership experiences, and gain thought-provoking insights on how we can crack the Active Code and get more children more active more often. If you like what you hear, please leave us a rating and subscribe wherever you get your pods.
Welcome to episode 5. Today we're delighted to be joined by a man who has a wealth of knowledge and experience in our sector. Qualified teacher, university lecturer, business owner, a senior tutor for Youth Sports Trust, the list goes on. And most recently the founder of a groundbreaking app that helps schools and other organisations celebrate and support their students' physical activity journeys. Director of the Centre of PE, Sport and Physical Activity at Kingston University, and working towards a doctorate that looks at how children get into and stay in sport. Head of PE in 3 London schools, extensive experience in PE and sport, working with 3-year-olds right through to postgraduates. His career mission is to make all forms of physical activity and the benefits they bring available to all young people by breaking down barriers and transforming teaching and coaching practices. With over 20 years experience as a leader and a well-respected academic lead in the PE, sport and physical activity space, we're honoured to welcome Mr. Greg Dreyer to the Active Code podcast. Welcome, Greg.
Thank you very much. I hope I can live up to that billing. See how we get on.
I think it's safe to say that you've been there, done it and got the t-shirt when it comes to physical activity, Greg. What better place to start than at the very beginning? So where did your career journey start?
Well, yeah, it depends how far back you want to go. I think you said in the intro that I've been in this field for 20 plus years, and it's more on the plus than the 20. So I won't bore everyone with a breakdown of my bio, because I think we all tend to think we're probably a bit more interesting than we actually are. But my journey was, I guess in many ways it was pretty standard for people who went into PE and still come into PE teaching. I was a sport mad kid. I was reasonably good at a number of sports. By playing football, it got me a scholarship to the States, and it also I also applied to go to a university in the Midlands to study PE on what was then the 4-year courses. There are not many of them left anymore. Anyway, I stayed in the States for a year. Had a lot of fun and enjoyed playing football over there, but it wasn't the best university experience. So I took my place at Warwick, and then I knew I wanted to work in inner London. I was originally from East London. That's where I had a 16-year teaching career. And then towards the end of that teaching career, we actually started a business similar to Aspire and its network partners business. This was in 2004. We started something called Active Kids, and then we changed the name to My Sports, and you can see the continuity in the My thing. And that was really very much looking at how do we develop movement competency for young children. We really focused on 3 to 7-year-olds when we started, and then they grew with us and business grew, and we ended up offering a range of services, very local, and we only stopped that in 2019 when miMove, the app that you mentioned in your intro, really started to kick in, because we were running Active Kids and their My Sport while I was pursuing my university career as well. And so, yeah, I've been in university work for 2007, and in fact, I'm in my last 3 weeks of working in higher education. And come April the 1st, I'll be very much full time on miMove app, and we're really excited about what we're seeing happening with that and the impact that it's beginning to have, and certainly the potential impact is just like super exciting. So yeah, we're going to give that everything we've got, and hopefully that will really help deliver on the my aspirations that you mentioned in your intro, that which are really about breaking a cycle. Because in my 30 plus years in PE and youth sport, we've been having very similar conversations, and part of those conversations, a key part of it, is that it's a great area of school life and youth life, children's lives for some kids, and that's a really long, ongoing, somewhat boring conversation, because we keep going around in circles with this. So by utilising modern tech, by utilising app technology, I'm really hoping that so certainly as far as a professional legacy, the All Blacks idea of leaving the shirt in a better place than you got it, I'm hoping that will be my contribution, on top of hopefully some other worthwhile things that I've done, but that's not for me to judge.
Yeah, awesome. Yeah, I'm sure it will be as well, Graham. I'm sure it will be. And we've also then gone from 20 plus years to 30 plus years. But
we have, yeah. I let that slip, didn't I? I know, don't look at all that.
Vast amount of experience, and I think it's part of this podcast is to try and share those experiences with as many people as possible. What's changed, Greg, in those 30 years in the physical activity space?
Well, as I alluded to, not enough. There's been some brilliant people doing brilliant things, but if we're looking at structural, meaningful change for across the majority, if not all, children, then yeah, I think we need to be brutally honest with ourselves, and we have to say not enough. We only need to look at the reports, whether it's World Health Organization or any of the national reports. Most kids don't get into physical activity as a normal and natural and habitual part of their lives, especially as they grow up. We still have huge leakage from pre-teen through to teenage years. We've still got very significant gender imbalance, especially despite what's happening at the top end of elite sport. And maybe if we're optimistic, we say things can start there, but I'm not sure we've got a lot of evidence to say that, because and don't get me wrong, I really welcome the fact that Sky feature netball and that women's football is getting a lot more airtime these days. I think that's great, but there's not a lot of evidence that trickles down to impact on what's going on in playgrounds up and down the country. So yeah, not a lot has changed. A lot of initiatives do get recycled. I remember in the late 90s, Denise Lewis was heading a Nike campaign to get girls into sport. Fast forward 15, 16 years, and we've got Girls Active with Youth Sport Trust, and we've got This Girl Can with Sport England. And the commonality of those things is, I think one of the flaws is that it focuses far too much on types of activity rather than types of experiences. So thinking beyond what activity are the kids or the young people doing, rather than how do we shape the experiences. And I think we'll probably expand on that as the conversation goes on. That's one of the things that I think is holding us back. I guess one of the things that's really changed since 2007, 2008 is the nature of the workforce. And as you'll know only too well, and especially in primary schools, the introduction of non-QTS personnel to teach PE is a very interesting development. The pros and cons of that is something that has been very, very well documented, very well debated. Still not many months go by on social media where there's not some discussion about class teacher versus external coach, internal coach, in-house specialist, those sort of discussions. We took the line, as you said in the intro, I'm just about to finish 5 years at Kingston University, where I went there on the blueprint of establishing a centre for PE, sport and activity. So it's like a subject research and practice area. And one of the things that we did was say, look, the debates about who should be teaching curricular PE are almost irrelevant. Head teachers have made their decisions. It's not really for, well, you can discuss and question those decisions, but the fact is that they're not going to change those decisions. There's a very good reason why they arrive at those decisions. A couple of national organisations made statements or put out policy statements about who should be teaching PE, and they didn't seem to have any impact or bearing at all. So our thinking was, well, let's work with the people who are working in schools, and I wrote a degree program to sort of backfill, if you like, the knowledge, and it was one of the most positive aspects of my professional career today. Actually, I work with brilliant people, brilliant coaches who are working in schools, really keen to learn, and it was hugely impactful. Remains hugely impactful on their lives, their careers. These are really committed people who were making a hell of a contribution to the schools that they're working in, and I taught every kid, knew every kid's name, had loads of enthusiasm. But what they didn't have, and it wasn't their fault, they were thrown into a space that was beyond their competency. There's big questions about why that happens. But they were dead keen to learn. And after about 3 or 4 weeks of the course, they were like, "Gosh, we don't know this stuff, do we? It's like we do it every day, but we don't know this stuff." It's like, okay, well, we've got 3 years, and they did, and they graduated, and the first cohorts graduated last summer. It was a real shame for pandemic that they didn't get their graduation ceremony, because almost all of them were the first graduates ever in their family, and we were really, really excited about that graduation day. That was highly significant for me as a tutor and for them as students, but hopefully one day we get to celebrate their efforts.
Yeah, and full credit to you as well, Greg. And I've been very briefly involved. I think it was second year project that they were involved with that you asked me to come along and support on, and that it was a real eye opener, and it's clearly something that's needed in our sector. So yeah, full credit to you on that, and hopefully long may that continue and more people get to become aware of that degree and go through it, because it clearly will have an impact, and it's definitely needed. So with regards to physical activity, it clearly means a lot to you, but what do you do at the moment to keep physically active?
Yeah, well, so actually, I was only speaking to. I went out with my son yesterday, and I don't know, over lockdown, we've done some silly things, but we started doing like these hill reps up in North London where we live. There's a place called, quite a well-known landmark called Ali Pali. Used to be the BBC broadcasting place, and so we do some hill reps up there, and there was another group that we joined in with. It was really nice actually, and cool group of people, ranging from people about my age through to kids who were my son's age, about 15. And so we just joined in with them. And one of them was the guy who was about my age, was an ex top class hurdler who used to hurdle with like Colin Jackson and train with John Regis, and those people of a certain age will remember those elite athletes of the 90s. And we were like, well, I say jogging back, I was struggling back, having completed the session, and we only had about a kilometre to get home. And then we were talking about this guy who'd been there and done it. He was Commonwealth hurdler and all the rest of it. We were saying, like, it just becomes part of your life. And he said, do you think it's part of your life? And I said, well, yeah, it's like, 40 odd years that pretty much every day I've done something or planned something that it enables me to be physically active. And so what does it mean is a really big question. Right? It's just a habit in some ways. It's a habit that I really notice when it's not present in my life, whether that be from injury or illness or just time constraints. Although I have got much better at shorter, like 15, 20 minutes, just do something, especially over lockdown. It probably doesn't mean about health. I'm quite critical of the health perspective that we keep pushing health. I think health is an outcome, and we might expand on this later. But I think for most people who are physically active, I'm not sure that the health benefits are front and center of your mind. When I'm trying to drag my body up Ali Pali as fast as I can, which is really, really not very fast. I don't know what it is. So I do really enjoy what are quite challenging sessions, and I don't know why. Um, they're not particularly pleasant, are they, when you do that sort of thing? But there's something that keeps pulling me back. Now, I won't lie, I leave the house to do a session like that, full of trepidation, and I'll try not to think about it too much, and then you get to the bottom of the hill and just sort of try and run as fast as your legs will take you. But I don't know really what it means to me. It means it used to mean friendship. When I was a kid in team sport, it meant a lot of friendship. It's also meant thinking time. It means um, it means feeling a certain way, being a certain way in my head and in my body. Means setting me up, giving me confidence to, if I can go through that Ali Pali run, I think, well, I could probably do most things. I think that's probably a bit eulogized. It's probably a bit romanticized. I'm not sure it is that transferable. If you could do hard physical workouts, that you can achieve anything and everything. Um, I think I don't know. I'm not equipped to say whether that is transferable. I think we probably claim that there's too much that's transferable from sport and physical activity into everyday life. But it certainly means a lot because I keep doing it. But really, really pinpointing what it means is really difficult. And I've been really fortunate in the work I've been doing to really explore that question in probably far too much detail, to be honest. And been really interested by some of this, with stuff that gets quite philosophical, because really at the heart of that is a philosophical question. Like, what's the meaning? How do you find meaning in using your body in a certain way? And that's quite a difficult question to unpick.
Yeah, yeah. I think, Greg, first you said Ali Pali. As a Brummie, my only knowledge of Ali Pali was the dart. So when you
That's
said
right,
that
yeah.
you'd head over to Ali Pali for some
That's right.
physical activity experience, I was expecting you to say you'd just step up to the hockey. So it's good to know you were running up a hill. It's good to know.
Yeah.
Greg, you talked about short 15, 20-minute bursts of activity, which I think in many people's busy lives, that's a common theme now. Were you in front of the TV with PE with Joe over
No,
lockdown?
no, I really don't like working out in my house. So my mornings, since the gyms have been shut, involve it's a rather strange sight. It involves me walking about 400 meters to my nearest park. Come rain, snow, I've been there in the -2, whatever it is, with power bands. And I mean, how surreal is that? You've got middle-aged bloke walking over to a park with like these long elastic bands. It's like beggars believe what it must look like. And so no, I don't get involved with Joe, but I do go over the park with my power bands and again do something that sort of feels like it's doing some. I don't know what it's doing. It's quite tiring. Sometimes I feel a bit dizzy, to be honest. I keep going back there most mornings. And I come home and have a cup of coffee and think, right, I could get going now.
Brilliant. Sounds like a good routine. You've highlighted a lot of the benefits really for you of physical activity, such as those friendships, gives you thinking time, obviously the health benefits as well. But some people may not be engaged or enjoy sport or the idea of those out of breath hill sprints that you describe. So how do you promote physical activity to others, especially those that aren't engaged in sport or the idea of physical activity?
Yeah, so I guess that's the $1 million question, and that's what I was referring to before. That we've been trying to crack that certainly throughout my career and probably for a lot longer. And we could probably discuss that, I reckon, all day and explore that issue. But in a nutshell, I think we need to be much more inclusive in our thinking. We need to start by acknowledging that if we just keep replicating what works for us, and I'm talking like right at the micro level, like how do children experience sport, physical education, and physical activity? And when I say experience it, like what are the factors that contribute to that experiencing? Like, and in very broad terms, that's what they're doing, but it's also how they're doing it. And very, very importantly, is how we frame success. So very typically, especially in a primary school, but it's probably in a secondary school as well. And we have to look at schools because schools are the only place where all kids will experience this stuff. Of course, those who are already in, for whatever reason, whether it's parental factors or other socializing factors, of course, they're going to, holiday camps, they're going to organised sport, they're going to other, some of them are having holidays that might revolve around physical activity. Some very privileged kids, will go, for a ski holiday in the summer or whatever. So they're experiencing, sport and physical activity in its broadest sense in a range of venues. But for a lot of kids, the only place is in school. So that's where we really have to examine what we're doing and why we're doing it. And why we do it that way. So very typically, there's an awful lot of confusion around the interrelationship between sport and PE. And one of the problems with that is PE is often associated with a pathway into sport. And sport is often associated with winning and losing, and therefore defining being good by the young person who wins most. Now, really, really good coaches and the more progressive national governing bodies have really tried to address this, and I find it amazing that organisations like the Football Association and like the RFU, who you would think would be all about competition and performance levels, because that is a big part of their brief to develop world-class performers, they're all about inclusive, developmentally appropriate activities for youngsters, about holding back on the outcome, really focusing on processes. And yet in primary schools, which on the face of it are all inclusive organisations, apart from when it comes to sport and PE. And it's not necessarily down to them. They're working within a context. So I'm not sure that the school games and the national curriculum that talks repeatedly about excelling and succeeding in competitive sport for children under the age of 11, I'm not sure that's particularly helpful. It's certainly not helpful, and this is very, very evidenced through research. It's certainly not helpful for the children that you asked me about, Luke, in the question. So we need to start by understanding, and there's a difference between understanding and then accommodating and appeasing. I'm not necessarily talking about just preferences, but we need to start by reframing what we think good is. What is a good outcome? Every kid who leaves a primary school and then a secondary school that doesn't have physical activity as a normal, natural, habitual part of their life, for me, that's an L. That's a loss in our win-lose columns. Like, we have not won with that child. We're meant to be in the business of promoting a certain and supposedly a very important lifestyle. So we really need to know what's the rate of activity, how is each child engaging with activity, and how which children are not engaging with activity. And therein lies one of the key drivers that we develop miMove, so that adults, caring, responsible adults, can capture that data in order to make better decisions about how we create that environment that is much more inclusive, is much more connected to the child, is much more caring, like we're actually bothered. If we're bothered about children who we're not capturing, we have to know what's going on. So from a miMove perspective, we're delivering the data and the intelligence that enables you to know, and the knowing is caring. If you don't know, then you don't really care. If it's important, you need to know. So there's probably I said we could talk about that all day, Luke. So I'll stop there for the sake of the listeners who, at risk of dozing off if I carry on any longer.
Greg, you've alluded on to miMove there, and something we can come on to that, because I think it's a really fascinating concept that you guys have designed, and a really exciting phase of rollout. And there's hundreds of users worldwide already, which is brilliant. And you talk about the importance of capturing that data, because we don't know what we don't know. So really interesting approach to this, and it is a relatively new approach, Greg. So just want to, the floor is yours really on this. Do you want to go into a bit more detail around what miMove is and how we hope that it will change the I guess the focus of physical activity and really give some focus to it?
Yeah, sure. So, I mean, just to give clarity, as you said, what is it? So it's an app that in which schools and other organisations, in the same way as they purchase other edutech, they purchase the accounts, they get the account. So it's a B2B process. It's not B2C. So an individual can't go onto App Store and download miMove. It has to be the accounts are opened by schools or coaching organisations, or there's some sports clubs as well using it. They buy into miMove. They then give accounts to the young people that they work with. The young people then open the app on their devices, and they log their activity. It's really significant that they are logging the activity and that the activity is not being logged for them by way of wearable tech or other mobile sort of technology, like Fitbit and stuff like that. And I could speak at length about the psychological risks, I suppose, of putting chips on kids and just tracking them. And it sort of relates earlier to when I said about we need to be wary of the experiences that youngsters are having. So they need to feel, certainly pre-teens and teens is a period in their life where they're trying to define who they are. They're developing an identity. And so with that identity, they need to have a degree of ownership. That's why we keep using my. It's miMove. The young person should feel a sense of ownership of that. They should have a degree of autonomy. And, there's a brilliant woman called Vicky Goodyear at Birmingham University who's done quite a lot of research. In fact, a new paper came out only last week looking at young people's social media and health apps. And consistently she's showing that a notion of surveillance through wearable tech just doesn't cut it with the young people that Luke was asking about in particular. The most active kids are fine wearing Garmin and Fitbit. That's absolutely fine for them. They're used to that. Well, certainly the ones who are into certain like endurance-based activities are anyway. But for everyone else, it's like it might have a bit of a novelty kick in, but for most kids, they just feel that they're not in control of that. So we designed an app that we learned from how young people are engaging with social media, where they feel that they can select what they like in all of, they're much more proactive when they're on Instagram, for example. So we tried to learn from that, and it's while at the same time making it a really simple interface. So the young person just logs what they did, how long they did it for, where they did it, and really importantly, how it felt. So again, really driving the quality of the experience. They log that, and then the school, the coaching organisation, the sports club, whoever it is, can log on to the web app, and they log on to a dashboard where they can see all the headline data, and then sitting behind the dashboard is the granular data for each and every student. So with that knowledge, again, you can, where we're seeing it have the most impact and where we're working with mind-blowingly good practitioners, they're engaging with the data and just using that to drive really good professional decisions about what they do with young people. It triggers conversations with the young people, with parents. We had reported to us only end of last week that at a parent evening, one of the parents said it's just a brilliant app for the youngster. And we're not really numbers people, to be honest. As I keep saying, it's about the quality of the experience for the person. So when we hear data coming back to us about because the miMove has made the young person much more aware of their activity levels, parents were reporting things like the teenager is volunteering to take the dog for a walk, and then they could log it. So they're much more tuned in to how much they're moving and in what context they're moving. And that was absolute music to our ears, because one of the things that we're trying to say, and it goes back to, knowledge is the starting point, and that's knowledge for the user, the youngster themselves. They basically have got a journal of their activity. They can target set, they can engage with that data how they want to. But as soon as we start measuring something, we start valuing it, and vice versa. We should value what we measure. That's a two-way relationship. And for decades now, we've been saying to youngsters, oh, you know what, physical activity is so important, and it's blatantly not good enough. If it's important, it's not good enough not to know how active the youngsters are. That just doesn't match up. If McDonald's are think it's really important to sell burgers, they need to know how many burgers they're selling. That's in the world of commerce, that's absolutely bog standard. If you haven't got that, how on earth can you review? Can you develop? Can you change what you do, or even keep the best bits if you haven't got that data to start with? So, yeah, that's what miMove is. That's where it comes from, and we're beginning to see, as I sort of touched upon there, some really significant impact, and we're very excited about that.
Great stuff. And I think you hit it on the head there, Greg. I think in business, in particular, in schools, across all organisations, you get typically set of KPIs, dashboards that what gets measured gets improved. So why not now? I guess is what you're saying from a physical activity perspective. Really exciting times ahead, I'm sure, on the miMove side, and obviously that transition away now into a new life as such, I guess, as miMove as a commercial operation, which is mega exciting. We're just going to focus on the leadership side of things now. So the Active Code looks at creating more leaders and better leaders in our sector, so we can get more children more active more often. So from your own experience, Greg, who's the most inspirational leader that you've worked with?
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting word, inspiration. Inspiring you to do what, and how do they inspire? I think, again, it could probably be a bit romanticized. I think there are, thankfully, some really amazing people. A lot of the time, I don't even know why they're amazing or what's amazing about them. But I think probably one of the people who I've got the most respect for, and I think there are times when I watch her performance and just think, well, that's really off the scale good, is the CEO of the Youth Sport Trust, Ali Oliver. She's just incredibly thoughtful, very professional, always thoroughly prepared, and just very, very highly skilled in all that she does. Really values the people around her, listens to the people around her. And she just strikes that balance between being approachable and personable, but also very clearly driving her organisation, and willing to step up. And good things, bad things happen. She's like, yeah, that was my call, and I'll take responsibility for that. So, yeah, I think she's probably the standout leader that I've had the opportunity to work reasonably closely with. I hope I haven't done a disservice to other people. When I was in school, there was a brilliant head teacher who I really enjoyed working with, who was honoured for his efforts. The day after he was knighted, he walked into the staff room, and the whole staff had arrived in fancy dress as Knights of the Round Table, King Arthur and his crew, to basically just take the mickey out of the fact that he's got a knighthood. And he just walked in and just found it very, very funny, and said there and then, I don't want anyone ever calling me Sir Alistair. Which, that whatever you think of the honours system, it says a lot about the person, that it wasn't changing his outlook, and it wasn't changing his identity, and he really didn't want to be seen to be a different person who he was the day before. And that level of humility, again coupled with very clear leadership and courage, really stands out for me.
Two very good picks there, Greg, from Annie Oliver, being prepared. Obviously, you said good listener, approachable, driving an organisation forwards, to the knighted head teacher who's down to earth and full of courage. So if we asked one of your colleagues about your leadership style, what would they say about you?
I don't know. I don't know because it's not a conversation that we have very often, and we probably should to get that 360 perspective on things. We really should have that, and certainly working in education and in universities in particular. Now, one of the flaws with those systems that we work in is that they are top-down hierarchies. So my performance review is always done with a line manager, and that's clearly got built-in flaws. My performance review should be 360 from the people that I work with. I would hope that they would say that I was honest. I'd hope that they would recognise ambition for the field, for the sector. I'd like to think that they would acknowledge a degree of integrity, a high degree of integrity, and that I was supportive to them and their efforts in an attempt to bring out the best in them. I think they'd probably say I've got too many ideas going on in my head, and that can both be interesting and I suppose tied in with the ambition, but it's probably got a downside as well. But maybe that's just me talking to myself. I don't know if they would say that. You'd have to ask them.
Yeah, I think having a lot of ideas matches up quite nicely with that ambition, I guess. Yeah, I suppose you need someone to temper them and to help you concentrate on specific ones at a time. You talked about being supportive there with your colleagues. So what are you working on at the moment to become a better leader?
Yeah, well, as I've been saying, I'm about to go through quite a significant transition in my life, and so I'll be working with a small team from moving away from a small team, which is a really good, effective team made up of brilliant people. I've thoroughly enjoyed working with them. They've sort of moved from that place from being a colleague to, I'd like to think that we've got good friendship. And then we go, in miMove, we're a tiny team. There's two of us, the two co-founders at the moment. We did, and we hope to be expanding. We're going to need staff, but we're not looking at that until we've got really good product market fit, and we've got really good traction, and we know much more. And then, as the number of users grows, we will need staff. So I'm actually working, I guess, in that transition is a period of adjustment. And again, I suppose there's more learning. How do we create a very different working environment that's very effective, that's very dynamic, and so yeah, we're trying to take inspiration and learn from lots of different sources. I've had an awful lot of learning to do around app development. So what we're leading at the moment, even though we're not leading a team of colleagues, we're certainly leading app development. We're leading on the product. We're then leading on the market. So we are working with a very small number of people. And so the key things are things like clarity of message, in ensuring that we're sharing intelligence, because we're learning so quickly. That how do we ensure that everybody who's involved in miMove is on message with what we're learning? So if we have an insight group with a group of schools and we hear them and we get some really key pointers from them, that's got to be disseminated very quickly, because there's people in different parts of the world having conversations with schools and other organisations, so they need to know that. So we've done things like, a really detailed market segmentation exercise. Who's our warm market, to ensure that our agents are can really highlight and recognise someone who's absolutely ready to go. And also, I guess the other side, the flip side of that, is to not waste valuable time when there's probably not a very warm lead at the moment, because with those 5 stages of change that are very well recognised, especially with tech, what does an early adopter look like compared to a later adopter, or a late majority as they're often referred to? So yeah, gaining the intelligence around the market, driving the product, working with people who are in fields that I've never had the opportunity to work with. And to be honest, that's absolutely invigorating. It's brilliant. It also really highlights some of the very sheltered worlds that we live in education, and that crossover between sectors. Which was one of the things I thought was great about what you're doing on the podcast, that you're deliberately going outside of education to support the education and youth sport and activity sectors. So I'm living that, and it's definitely a worthwhile journey.
Yeah, and with your experience, Greg, there's a lot it's definitely going to help in this new journey that you're on. We talk about outside of the education space. So are there 2, 3, 4 things that you've identified that are maybe areas that you need to develop as a leader yourself to bring into this new venture?
Without turning this into sort of a therapy session, especially as we're such a small organisation, but you're working in a bigger organisation, so you might have a view whether it's as applicable. The blurring of the lines between the personal and the professional. All organisations reflect the strengths and weaknesses of their leaders. There's no getting away from that, in my opinion. Whether you're talking about Pep Guardiola or a head teacher in a school, they are so impactful in the culture, the workings, the policies, the ethos of those organisations. So one of the things that blurs that lines for me is, we're working with some really good people who are trying to up, and I use this word carefully and in a very specific context, trying to up our level of aggression in the market. And by aggression, I don't mean about treading on anyone's toes or walking over people's heads. I think what they mean when they talk to us, and they're coaching us, I suppose, on how to take this app to a place that we want to take it to reach certain milestones. And so by aggression, they mean bullishness. I think that's probably a better word. Having unrelenting, unwavering faith in what you're doing. And I come from a world in education where we're much more humble than that. We're much more reflective. We don't really like being that sort of person. I don't really know why, because I think in education you do have some really good leaders who say, no, this is what we stand for and this is what we're going to do. But what they're doing is they're working in one organisation, and we're working in a market which is absolutely huge. So learning around how to understand the market, when we had to go through a pitching process to raise investment for miMove. And so we had to learn loads about how do you define your market. One of the common pitfalls is that you say, well, there's, I don't know, let's just take international schools, right? There's 11 million kids now who are educated in international schools. And 10 years ago, that number was about 2.5 million. So one of the things that my colleagues and sort of those coaches said to us was, well, 11 million is a big number, isn't it? Is that, are they really your market? It's like, and drilling deeper into, well, what's the target market? What's the attainable market? And then how do you create a domino effect and a degree of FOMO, so that once you've got, assuming, and we have to move beyond assuming, we've got a really, really good product that we think delivers never before had data to enable people to do their job better. So then if you get that and you show the impact of that, then within our space, within education, it's like, well, how can you not have that? And that's where we've got to get to. But mapping out that journey, as I said, it's very, very new to me, very new. It's exciting, and sometimes it feels daunting. But then when we actually sit down and look at the roadmap and we look at what our milestones are, and you break it down, you can. So a lot of what we're going through at the moment is I guess, is the psychology of transitioning into a new field. and it requires a shift in headspace.
Absolutely. I think one thing that stood out there is that clarity of knowing what you're doing and being bullish in the fact that you can do that thing the best, really. Just on leadership within the sector, Greg, you've name dropped a few people already. What are your views on leadership as a whole within the sector that we're in at the moment?
There's leaderships, isn't there? And it's like, well, what is the sector? And I guess it depends what sector we're talking about. You know, you mentioned Joe Wicks. Well, what sector does he sit in? You know, he sits in a hybrid sector of social media influencer through to personal fitness, and then and how confusing is this? And then he's labelling himself, and other people are labelling him the nation's PE teacher. So one of the issues that we've got about leadership is we don't even know what the sector is, and it's siloed. And you've got people, you know, and I make no bones about this. I think there's people within physical education who can be very unhelpfully snobbish about what physical education is, and putting a fence around physical education, saying that this is our domain and it's very different. And there's also people within physical education who are not. So again, going back to Birmingham University, there's another woman there called Kathy Armour, and we love her work at Kingston from a sort of principal position, a starting position. And so going back to the sector, she says the debates and discussions around the divisions between physical education, school sport and physical activity are unhelpful, they're boring, and is a long-standing rabbit hole of a debate. And so we looked at that, and this was the cornerstone of the degree that I referred to earlier. And we said, no, if you're a responsible adult and you're working in any of those three fields, the only outcome that we're looking at, the only goal is to support young people in their development, in their progress, and in their learning. So it doesn't matter if you're in sport, if you're a youth sport coach, then your goal is to ensure the development of the kids in and through that sport. Now, as opposed to picking up trophies and winning. And I'd also hasten to add, I don't think the two are at odds with each other. I really don't. I think if you're developmentally appropriate and you look at the processes and the experience of young people, I've seen firsthand that when it becomes appropriate to be competitive, which depending on the sport, I suppose, but for me is somewhere in the mid-teens. Some sports it might be a bit earlier than that. Then, you know, kids will win. Whether that's important or not is a personal matter. Now, I'm going down a little bit of a rabbit hole here, and the point was, well, what is the sector? And so until we're really clear on the sector, I think we're always going to be very limited. We're not going to have a coherent voice. There's people who are going to be guarding their own patch, and I understand that. There's careers and important things that matter to people. But I think that is a real challenge in the sector, to be welcoming, to be acknowledging people's strengths and weaknesses, to be honest and open in conversations, and to be coherent. And again, I go back to Ali Oliver. I think she's genuinely going out of her way to try to bring people together to be more effective. When if you look on all organisations, if you look at a range of organisations that are within the sector, on their websites, they all make the same claims that have it sharing the same vision: more children, more active, more often. There should be an awful lot more common ground and cohesion than I think there is. I don't know that you might hear that you might hear that harshly. I hope it's
no, not at all, not at all. I think you're correct, Greg. To be honest, I think the big one, I guess from our perspective, no surprise, is a collaboration. From our experience, there's too many people too closed off, thinking they can rule the world on one element. It happens in all sorts of industry sectors, whatever you want to call it. But I think it's so important. You said that this is all about child development, progress, and learning, and that's absolutely 100% correct. So not one organisation is going to achieve that in this country or the world. So why not have a collaborative approach with people who share similar values, like-minded approach? It needs to happen for a shift to occur.
It does, and it needs to be evidenced. And again, that's why we developed our app, because you can make all sorts of claims about what you do. And at the moment, I've got a close colleague who works in the States, and in fact tomorrow we're co-presenting, and he talks about the sector's dark secret. And there's nothing sinister in that. It's this dark secret is just ignorance. Like, we just don't know. We claim that we know, but there's nothing to evidence it until you get Sport England's Active Life survey, which is always retrospective. So one of the things that we're super excited about with miMove is you could log on to miMove and you could literally see what kids did like yesterday. So if you start in an initiative in a school or a club, or you're bringing in new programs or new curricula or whatever it is, a lot of the stuff is absolutely great. A lot of the stuff that you do is great. And, to close the loop is like, well, let's see what impact. Daily Mile is a great example. Now, look, my academic work comes from a critical perspective, and there's a lot written that questions a lot of things around the Daily Mile and a lot of the claims on it. And I know that they are working with researchers to tell a narrative about the Daily Mile. But for me, it's pretty straightforward. If the kids are doing a Daily Mile and that's a meaningful, joyful experience for them, then I think it's a fair assumption that they would seek other opportunities to replicate that experience. In other words, run or walk elsewhere. So it's not unreasonable to expect that if you implement a Daily Mile, one of the outcomes of that is that you should have data to show that they're running, like whether it be in junior park runs or that they're just running with friends or family informally. And that seems to be a very sensible aspiration. Well, fine, let's get the evidence. And if the evidence is there that that's happening, I will happily drop any critical perspective that I'm coming from when it comes to the Daily Mile, because there's not a lot of arguing with that.
Yeah, no, very clear, Greg, that data is vital if we want to move forward and improve things and embed those lifelong ambitions to be physically active across the board, really. Just from a individual productivity point of view, I want to focus on. So you've juggled numerous roles over numerous years, and we often hear leaders in the sector complaining that there's not enough hours in a day. So what kind of quick win or takeaway could you give the listeners to kind of help with their productivity issues?
Yeah, well, I'm probably the worst person to talk about that, not because I'm not productive, but I learned really, I wouldn't say I learned the hard way, but I did far too much. And, I alluded earlier that we ran a business called Active Kids My Sport for 15 years while having a teaching and then a university course, while doing some consulting work, while working for the Youth Sport Trust. And my takeaway from that is you can't. You end up doing everything below the levels that you would like to, and that you need to. And so when we had this opportunity to really run with miMove, and it went from being something on a whiteboard that we would sketch to an actual live app that sits on a telephone, we were like, okay, we're going to learn those lessons. And so we sold my sport, and I had to tender my resignation to the Youth Sport Trust, and I then had to tender my resignation to the university. So then it's like, well, now we really do need to really focus on milestones, on targets, and on productivity. And I think because of the desire, because of the belief in the product, because of the enthusiasm, finding motivation is not hard at all. As a tiny team, we're having conversations like, okay, so how do we structure our working week, and what's reasonable to ask, and what's healthy for a working day. And sometimes I get to the end of a long working day and feel totally energized because are loving what we're doing, and believe in it. I think the boundary between relaxation and work can at times be blurred. I'm not advocating people doing 80-hour working weeks, but if that's where your heart and your head is at, I don't think there's anything wrong with that. Now you might ask, well, it's not very good prioritization if you're having to work really long hours. And so yeah, we're learning about the rhythm of the working day, and we're learning about how do we prioritize, and how do we set targets, how do we review days and weeks, and embedding those systems. When you're a team of two, it can be hard to formalize those systems, but we think it's really important because within a few months we want to be a team of 6, and then a team of 20, and then a team of 30 and plus. And then so the systems that we put in place, the habits we put in place, and the discipline to start Monday morning at 9 o'clock, and indeed to start every day at 9 o'clock, but to start Monday morning without start the week meeting, even though there's only 2 of us, and it's really easy to say, oh, I've just got a few things to do, is it all right? We try really hard not to do that. And then again, Friday afternoon finishes with, did we meet our targets that we set for the week? And those I guess on one hand very boring, but they're really, really important structures to put in place.
Yeah, it's always the simple things that give the most impact, Greg, I think, and that's definitely something that starting a week with that meeting and finishing it, and even with 2 of you at the moment, when you grow and you get to 6, 20, 30, that if you keep those regimes and keep the structure in place, it just becomes part of the culture, which we spoke about earlier. So yeah, just to finish off, Greg, we've got 3 hopefully quick fire questions. So 3 books or podcasts that you would recommend to our listeners to develop their leadership skills.
Well, yeah, I don't engage. Maybe I should engage a little bit more in management literature. I'm much more interested in because there's a crossover between what we're trying to do and the field and the sort of wider perspectives, and I think a lot of stuff is so transferable. So I just finished BJ Fogg's Tiny Habits, which I thought was an absolutely brilliant book. Now I went into it looking at how do we get kids into physical activity, what can we learn from that book, and it absolutely made sense to me that they need to start with tiny steps, especially the young people that Luke referred to earlier who are not in this field. But it also had a hell of a knock-on effect in how you live your life, and how you develop good routines and good habits. So I really enjoyed that. I really enjoyed some of the literature, and it is, it's not particularly easy. Although, yeah, I think it's got easier, more accessible. But I'm really into the literature around meaningfulness and physical activity. There's a brilliant guy called Tim Fletcher, who I've had the good fortune to speak to a couple of times, who works in Canada. And to find out more about that, you go to lampe.com, LAMPE, learningaboutmeaningfulpe.com. So that's a really good place to start. And there's a really nice podcast that's similar to that called Meaningful PA, Meaningful Physical Activity, that's run by a Finnish woman called Nora Räikkönen. And she's just incredibly smart and has some great guests on about, it goes back to that question that Luke asked, what does it mean? What does physical activity mean to the participants? And it's so subjective, and understanding that meaningfulness more is fascinating. I'm not sure, coupled against, the icons in the field of, your Simon Sinek's of this world. And, I'm just trying to, I'm just finishing another book around scaling, because, I'm not from a business background, and the notion of scale and how it works. But I must say, most of the stuff I read about scale was already sort of on our business plan. So when you read stuff like that, it's not that it's a waste of time. It's quite affirmational, isn't it? You think, oh well, I was sort of getting that more or less right. I might not have used the same language, but we were all right. So yeah, it's that would do for my recommendations. I wouldn't claim to be an expert, and I'm really keen to get recommendations. One of the things you always send my way, Paul, is insights that you've had, and keep them coming, please.
Brilliant, thank you, Greg. And there's some really interesting books and releases there that you've listed that listeners can get involved with and take a look at. The title of the podcast, The Active Code, is the idea of there's a code to crack, really, regards physical activity and what leaders in the sector can do to get more children more active more often. So, we've talked a lot during this podcast about ideas of ways people can collaborate, help each other, be on the same page. What one thing would you say organisations in the sector need to do to achieve what we're all saying we want to achieve, getting more children more active more often?
Well, I suppose it won't be a surprise to anyone that I think it starts with having really good live data that's offered by the youngsters to inform decision making, and that could be macro or micro decision making, to build community, to build connectedness, to trigger conversations, and to bring physical activity to the fore of relationships, within organisations and within communities. And I think until we do that, there'll be a lot of people making a lot of claims about a lot of products that, in fact, has led to a really saturated market. If you look at, I'm sure you're acutely aware of this with the work that you do, but if you look at the amount of primary school curriculum material for physical education that's out there, and I'm not demeaning anyone. I'm sure some of it, well, I know some of it is really, really well thought through, but I just don't think we could continue unless we've got better ways of evaluating the impact of our work. So, that was a realization that we had in 2017 when I was on a family holiday, and I've been in this field almost 30 years it was then, and I'm like, that first question that you asked, Paul, what's changed? And I'm looking at all the effort, the time, the cost, the expense of getting kids into physical activity, and I thought, well, I couldn't answer that. I don't know. Are kids more active, less active? 2012, the country spent £9 billion to inspire a generation. Did it work? Who knows? And that's what Aaron refers to as the dark secret. We don't know. So I think, the active code needs to start with using data, collecting and using data much more intelligently to drive policy and practice.
Great. Yeah, and look, Greg, I think hopefully we have a conversation again in a few years' time on this podcast, and you're in a position to turn around and say, we do know. I mean, this is where we were, this is where we are now, this is where we are today, to the hour at a point with the software you've developed as well. And we can sit here and say that it is having an impact, and certain projects and programs are having an impact on children's lives and helping them develop, progress, and learn. So thank you very much for your time today. It's been a really good hour that we've had there. Going back to the very start, reflecting on your career, looking at the importance of physical activity to you, and keep those heel runs going even when lockdown finishes. You've got to keep them going.
Yeah, I look forward to it.
But yeah, thank you for your time.
Thanks
today,
for inviting me on. It's always good to catch up, and I hope it's useful for people listening. Thank you.
Yeah, and just to finish, Greg, as well, if you want to share where people can find you on social channels. Sure. So
miMove is my is spelled MI, so it's MIMOVE.com, and on Twitter it's at miMove app. My personal Twitter is at Greg_Dreyer, and if people really want to email, I'm greg@miMoveapp.com.
Great stuff. Thanks again, Greg.
Thank you.
Take care.
Cheers.
Speak soon.
Join us next time for the Active Code podcast. Remember to subscribe to the podcast so you don't miss an episode. You can connect with us on Twitter at aspire_partners, and find out more about us and the network at www.aspire activepartnerships.co.uk.